Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of our podcast, Immigrant Success Canada, your podcast for a successful and happy life in Canada. My name is Emmanuel, and I'm your co host alongside with my partner, Charlie.
Hi, I'm Charlie Beck.
And today we have the pleasure and the privilege to have Richard Fleming as a guest. I'll let Richard introduce himself, but before that, I hope you have watched all of our previous episodes. If you haven't, Charlie, can you tell our followers and the people who are watching us where they can find the previous episodes?
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to introduce our program. I'll talk about it very briefly what it is about. Our program is basically to help new immigrants to be successful and happy in Canada for a long term. Here we are talking about next 20 years. So Emmanuel and I developed a coaching program to help new immigrants to succeed in Canada. So if you want to know more about our program, please check and visit our website, isc-go.com. Thank you for watching our podcast.
Thank you. Now, back to our guest. Richard, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to be a guest at our podcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience to tell who you are, what do you do, and why are you a guest here?
Well, I've worked with the Canadian government as a research scientist for it was a bit over 35 years, and I'm retired now. And the reason I'm on here is because I know Charlie, and the reason I know Charlie is because we play tennis together,
Oh, congratulations.
both in Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah, great. So you said you worked for the government, uh, the federal or provincial government?
Yes, the federal government is correct, and with the Canadian Forestry Service.
Forestry Service. That was actually my next question. So could you describe just briefly to us and our the people who are watching us what your job consisted of?
Well, I was a research scientist, so we would pick up particular aspects that needed some scientific work on them in terms of problems that were existing within the forestry sector. And what we in particular worked on, we were interested in the large scale spread of epidemics of pest diseases. And these pest diseases would be mainly insect driven. So it would be spruce budworm we worked on a lot. And then we looked at the interaction with those pest diseases with forest fire. And at the end of it all, we looked at how climate and climate change might affect the two of those and their interaction.
Sounds like a very interesting job and probably a very interesting career that has changed throughout the years significantly.
Well, I found it very interesting. Yes.
Our podcast mainly focuses on newcomers and immigrants. And from your experience, choosing a career is a difficult decision, especially for newcomers, for new immigrants. Charlie and I went through this. You have worked for the government, for the federal government, for a long time. Uh, what would you tell a newcomer who could consider working for the federal government? What would you tell him, somebody who would consider having a career as you did, because you didn't have a job, you had a career? What would you tell him, a person?
Well, I guess with the uh, when I first joined the lab, there were quite a few people that were immigrants from different countries. There was a person from Scotland who was another research scientist. There were two or three from India. One was a Sikh, another was a Tamil. There was a person from Iraq. Um, so there was quite a number of different people from different places. but most of them, I think, came with qualifications of some sort. So it helped them to get, and these were getting into scientific positions. So these are pretty high level positions. Um, at lower levels, I don't think you would need as much, and in terms of qualifications, and I think it might be easier in the sense of I think there's much more of an acceptance of trying to get immigrants involved in the government and doing all sorts of jobs. So, but a lot of it is you have to apply to the government, and they can be, I guess, fairly slow in dealing with you. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity because the government sort of seems to have its fingers in just about everything in Canada.
I'm not sure if that's necessarily a good thing, but that's a topic probably for another conversation. How? Let me ask you this: how much passion means for a job like yours, for example? How much you need to be passionate? Can you tell us a little bit about
Uh,
that?
well, I think I was fairly passionate, but at the same time, you have to be patient. So you can't expect everything to be done overnight. And you can have some strange situations that can take a while to get resolved where you have a lot of bureaucracy. And so one person might have one set of rules, and the next person has a different set of rules. And these different sets of rules can sometimes be counterproductive.
Bureaucracy is unfortunately something probably all the countries around the world share.
Yeah.
um, how did you make a good balance between work and life while you work for the government? I'm assuming right now that your job implied traveling a lot.
Yes, I would apply to go to conferences, and there were a lot of people that surprised me at the level I was at that didn't seem to apply to go to a lot of conferences. But I was always keen to get to conferences and meet people from other countries and see their perspective on some of the things that we were doing. Um, it was also a way to, because most of my family at the time was in Toronto, so I could pass through Toronto and see my mom and dad until they passed away. Um, so there were opportunities to do things, and then I also applied for a sabbatical, which meant sort of working for a year in a different country, and I found that very rewarding.
I ne- we ne- I need to ask where did you work?
Oh, I worked in at the Rothamsted Experimental Station in Harpenden in England.
Okay, so still lab work.
Well, it was still it was so Rothamsted is basically an agricultural station, and I think it was founded in something like 1750. So it's been going on for ages, and they have collected daily records of insect attacks and flights and so on in Britain, and I used these this data, which was much more had much higher resolution than any data that we had in Canada at the time, to ask the question: is there any effect, or is there any behavior associated with this data which might be coincide with what you would expect from climate change? And it turned out that there was. So it was a real eye opener for me in terms of thinking, well, this is something real. And it was only in Britain, so it was a fairly small area. But that the methods that I used for that were subsequently used by other people that worked on at a much larger scale and with different sort of survey systems.
I see. Uh, Definitely. So basically, because now you have exposed is not the right word. You have revealed some of the things that you did, and you went into details. I believe there are many passionate people around the world that want to come to Canada, and that could actually have a significant impact in a research environment, or overall something like you did. So I would encourage everyone who's passionate to apply if there's opportunity. And I'm assuming, I don't know the field, but I'm assuming there's a need for people such as yourself, for researchers, for people who are passionate, that needs to have an input in this field.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think, particularly right now, in just in reading the news in Canada, there's clearly a shortage of medical people, and so that would be a huge, I think, opportunity for people to come in. And they're starting to lower standards for people coming from overseas and so on. Um, from what I'm reading,
Yeah, make it more accessible.
yeah.
Yeah, here I'd like to add one more thing based on Rich's comments and for new immigrants. So I, I read an article a lot actually yesterday from Toronto Star. They they talked about Canada is now struggling with the lack of workforce. So we accepted a lot of high qualified immigrants, but a lot of people still working in a low skilled jobs. So there is a significant gap there. So I think how we can solve that problem, right? We accept the best engineers, doctors, and all the people, professionals, but they cannot start right away. So I think, as Rich said, it takes time to go into your field and then to fully utilize your skills. So I like to say, new immigrants with the qualifications, take your time and then be patient. And then in the end, you can fulfill your dream and your specialty. I think that's my message. That's what I did for the last 20 years in Canada.
We have covered this in our previous episodes, saying that in Canada things doesn't don't happen as we might be used to in our own country, in our country of birth, because sometimes you get things happen faster there. So that might be one of the big differences. But overall, Canada can offer you uh, the life that you would wish for you and your family. One way of ensuring you are on the right path is to sign up for a program such as mine and Charlie. And Charlie mentioned at the beginning of this episode, isc-go.com is the website where you can find more information, contact us, and of course, watch the previous episodes with the other guests that we have over there. Rich, because you mentioned you're traveling and your family was in Toronto. Where are you located now?
Well, now I'm in Calgary.
Calgary, Alberta, one of the one province of Canada which is closer to the west coast. Does location matter when choosing a career as a new immigrant? In your opinion, of course, the way you view it and what you have seen others, that does when choosing to immigrate, the location matter?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of job you're looking for. Um, so you have to go to where the jobs are if that's a particular vocation that you want. But I think it also seems to be that a lot of immigrants seem to like to be together, if you like, so that they will have a common language and a common culture. And I think Canada is, on paper, supposed to be quite accepting of that because we tend to want to have a multicultural society as opposed to the US, which wants to have a big melting pot where everybody comes in and gets melted together so they're all one big family. And I, in particular, I kind of like the multicultural idea because I like going to different restaurants and things and trying food from different countries. And maybe that's partly because I've traveled a little bit, I don't know. But I think for the immigrants, so they have to balance sort of those cultural things to be together with people of their own kind, um, with kind of looking for the job and going where the job is. And I would think that as people get a little more comfortable in Canada, they might break away from their close cultural group and be more prepared to spread out and go to places where particular jobs are that they would like. And this might take one or two generations, I'm not sure.
And we know that Canada is quite a big country, and there's some places that you could you could go for sure. And before we hit record, you were mentioning also the field, the industries that one wants to choose to uh, to have a career in. Because if he comes and wants to work in the field that you do, probably Toronto could not be the recommended first place to land. What could you say
Yeah.
on that?
Well, I worked with the Canadian Forestry Service, so they have something like five big labs around the country, and so I think you'd probably want to go kind of in the general vicinity of one of those labs. And depending on what level you wanted to work at, um, you would go to a lab maybe that even specialized in that particular area. But if it's not that important to you in terms of, or you don't have a specific aspect that you'd like to be involved with the Canadian Forest Service, you could join any of the labs. And it's I found it quite an interesting job. I mean, I was unusual in that I spent most of my time in the summer in the lab, actually in the lab doing computer work and so on. But a lot of the people, including my brother, would spend long periods out in the forest gathering data and so on and information for us to analyze later. And there's a lot of people that really enjoy that kind of work. You're kind of away from almost every boss except the one that's working directly for. And you're just working in the woods, so it's like a day in the forest, listening to the birds. And but there can be it can be some hard work too.
Yeah. You have to enjoy outdoors, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. You want to enjoy the outdoors, and you want to be, I guess, prepared for the cold in the winter. And you may not have to work outside it in the winter that much, but you still have to clear the snow from your house and so on. So
Oh,
you've got that to deal with.
clearing the snow is not something that they put in this those pamphlets that they hand you when you want to come to
Oh
Canada.
no.
They keep that as a surprise, welcome.
We cannot talk anything without the snow.
Yeah, well, you can take up skiing.
That makes us cool and nice, right?
That's right.
The reason I'm asking all these questions is because I know many professionals, not necessarily in the field that you mentioned, but in similar fields, who come to Canada and end up doing something else, not a career. One of the reason being because there's an accommodation period, but financially, most of the time, people don't have the resources to wait until not necessarily the planets align might be too exaggerated, but things don't happen as they expect, so they start getting another job and then they get consumed with life. And I just want to highlight this, that if you plan in advance uh, what do you want to do, Canada can offer you the possibility of having a successful and happy life. And again, last time I'm gonna mention one way of getting in front of getting help is to sign up to a coaching program such as mine and Charlie. And we already know the website isc-go.com. Charlie, do you have any questions for Rich?
So actually, yeah, our talk reminded me one thing. We talked about what kind of career and what kind of jobs for immigrants, and as Rich told us, He's a high level research scientist. And so, what I like to comment is that some of my friends, including Rich and other people, their parents or their parents' came to Canada 200 years ago, and then they settled down, right? And then their children, grandchildren grow up, right? So as an immigrant, sometimes, especially first 3 years, will be really difficult, right? So at that time, you need to think about long term, okay? What about my next 10 years, 20 years? What about my children and then my grandchildren, right? So that kind of long term view will make you comfort, and then you can endure short term pain and then long term gain, right? That kind of perspective you need to build. That's exactly why Emmanuel and I built this program, because we want very talented and qualified people, ambitious people come to Canada, but they frustrated and then give up Canadian dream. So we want to help them. That's the main point that I realized through Rich's talk.
You said 3 years. I would say the first 5 years are a little bit more. I wouldn't call them difficult either, but they're different and they're more intense. But Charlie just said, and I can testify to that. Canada offers you some possibilities that other places probably don't. It's about the success as well, but also the happiness aspect is very important. Rich, thank you so much. Any word, final word to our followers, to the people who, for the people who are watching us?
Well, one of the things I would say is that I have been a little surprised that when I have visitors coming from overseas, one of the first things that they wanted to do, especially with us living in Sault Ste. Marie, which was right on the border with the United States, was they wanted to get over to the United States and visit the United States. And they thought, oh, the United States is just wonderful and all these great things. And I remember going to a meeting down in Mobile, Alabama, many, many years ago, but it was just before the Vietnam War started, and I was sitting at a table having lunch with a number of people who were from Malaysia, and they were all trying to get into the U.S. and they were sort of teasing me about, oh, why are you wasting your time in Canada? You can make so much more money in the United States and all this, and it was shortly after that that the U.S. entered the Vietnam War, and I thought, oh, those guys are liable to have been drafted if they got into the United States. And I mean, even right now, that just seems to be such an issue with. I mean, not that Canada is perfect, but it's so much safer, it seems, for the average person in the U.S. with all the gun violence and shooting that you hear about there. So, and in some cases, you have this President Trump who's sort of pointing his finger at immigrants, especially Latinos, and wanting to build big walls and things. So I really think Canada is much more welcoming of immigrants than the United States, even though the United States has a lot of economic success.
Great.
Canada as well, but the happiness, we are focusing more on the happiness factor
Yeah.
because that's what's missing. Rich, thank you so much. And I hope you'll come and visit us as a guest again soon.
Well, I hope it helps.
Thank you so much. Uh,
Absolutely.
our website is isc-go.com. That's where you'll find this episode with Richard Fleming, but also the previous episodes. You'll also find contact forms so you can get more information about our program and how it can help you to have a successful and happy life in Canada on the long term, 20, 25 years, and why not 125 years. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next episode.